I'm sitting here in the lovely confines of St. James Cathedral in downtown Seattle with Joseph Adam, a very dear friend and colleague who's going to be the soloist in our upcoming Philharmonic concert in what I believe may be the U.S. premiere of the poem for organ and orchestra by Jean Demessieux, legendary organist and composer. And so I'm going to turn it over to Joseph for a little while to talk about Demessieux, her position in the organ world, both then and lingering. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the piece and the instrument for which she wrote. So take it away, Joseph.
Thank you, Adam. I'm really looking forward to the chance of playing this piece. And I have to admit, I did not know of its existence before you approached me a few years ago about this. Jean Demessieux has an interesting position in the organ world and its legacy. She was a student of Marcel Dupré, who was the kind of legendary organist, and Demessieux was perhaps his finest student. She was recorded more than any other female organist at the time. She was born in 1921 and reached adulthood during World War II. Towards the end of the 1960s, her health was really compromising what she was able to do, and sadly, she died in 1968. Demessieux's recordings kind of languished in the 70s and the 80s. They were no longer available. When I was a student in the early 1980s, I didn't even know of their existence. In 2021, all of her commercial recordings were re-released, and that has given a lot of new examination of her legacy.
I was talking with Joseph before we started shooting, and we were talking about orchestrating for the organ, considering that this is her only work for organ and orchestra. Her use of the orchestra is spectacular. The Philharmonic and I have been greatly enjoying learning the accompaniment, which reveals a very sensitive ear for orchestral timbre. But I wanted to ask Joseph about how one orchestrates for the organ. He was mentioning that her specifications for the exact sounds that she wants used in the poem, that she's meticulous in her markings. So could you tell us a little bit about how one orchestrates for the organ?
Certainly. Over the centuries, it's one of the perplexing problems that come down to this day. For example, you open up any of the works of J.S. Bach for the organ, and there's almost nothing about what stops to pull, how the organ is supposed to sound, what kind of sounds, what kind of ensemble an organist creates at the organ. We have to get it through context, and the context was something that every organist knew, so of course they didn't write it down. By the 40s, many of them were very specific about what stops they wanted and what colors they wanted. They were more of orchestrators at the organ than some of their predecessors. Demessieux comes up with some really interesting things. For example, the very opening texture, and this is a background texture that she writes with the organ. She calls for a 16-foot quintetton, Borden 8, Nazard, and octavan 2 in the swell. Here's our quintetton 16. Sounds an octave lower, Borden 8, and that's at the unison. Nazard is an octave and a fifth higher than the unison, and that starts to add this odd sound, and the octavan 2 foot is 2 octaves above. So we have 4 individual sounds. And we put them together and we get this. But it's a sound that no other instrument can make. So if I do this opening little lick that she's asking for underneath the orchestra is sustaining this big E flat open underneath this, and she's asking us to do. But if you do something else, it's just wrong. It's sort of like saying, oh, I don't like the flutes in there. I'll reassign this to the oboes. No conductor these days gets away with something like that. Mahler did occasionally when he'd fix the orchestration of the Schumann symphonies. Few people do that, but not anymore.
In terms of combining the organ with what I will call the 21st century orchestra, winds, brass, percussion, strings, what are some of the potential dangers? What are some of the pitfalls that a composer faces, and how do you get over them?
That's a great question, and it's something that is not necessarily commonly known and commonly understood, even amongst organists. But it's something that's very dear to my heart. The organ can sustain in a way that even the symphony can't do. It's the only acoustical instrument and wind-driven instrument where if you play a note, I can play it as long as I keep the key down. It's never going to get any louder. It's also never going to get any softer, which means I have to be careful how loud I play. A composer may say forte, but I have to interpret what kind of forte is that going to be, who else is playing, what kind of texture is it? Because, for example, if it's a place where the organ is playing sustained chords underneath a busy thing, the longer I play this chord, the louder it's going to seem and more intrusive. A long sustained chord, I'm going to start a little softer. There we go. That's probably a safer bet. And so the organ can also, though, there's places, for example, in one of my favorite pieces, Strauss's Also Sprach, the strings carry the day, but the organ is just this kind of filling in the mortar between the bricks, maybe. But I have to be very careful to listen very carefully. For me, when I've been successful with my preparation, I don't hear anything from the conductor about the organ's too loud, or occasionally I want to hear, I could use a little more organ here.
The Philharmonic and I are so proud to be presenting the 4th U.S. premiere of a Ruth Gipps symphony. In this case, it's her Symphony No. 1, a work that she wrote, I believe, when she was still under the tutelage of Ralph Vaughan Williams. By the way, for those of you wondering about the characters of some of the great composers, Ruth Gipps later described Vaughan Williams as the single most decent human being I ever met. Lovely to know. As we've explored some of Ruth Gipps' symphonies in prior podcasts, we've taken note of the fact that she will frequently use a seemingly innocuous, limited bit of material and do amazing things with it over the course of a 20, 30, 40-minute piece. In the case of the Second Symphony, the opening melody, those 3 notes, 3 ascending notes, begin virtually every theme that we encounter in that piece. In the Fourth Symphony, there was an obsession with the major second, either used harmonically or melodically. In the First Symphony, her thumbprint is already obvious. I think it's fair to say that yes, it is the work of a very precocious, advanced student, which is not to say it isn't a great symphony. I've really come to think that it is. She's still learning about conciseness and form, and does it in this big 4-movement rhapsodic, very lush symphony. There are a couple of thumbprints inherited from her teacher, Vaughan Williams, and I think it's interesting to note that in some ways there are some similarities to Vaughan Williams's Fifth, which was written just before this piece was. Vaughan Williams's Fifth begins with that very prominent horn call. And the way that Ruth Gipps's first symphony begins is this series of chords. So, little similarity. And like Vaughan Williams's Fifth, that little chordal progression pops its head out of the fabric several times during the symphony. She even bookends the symphony with it, because those chords are the last thing that you hear in addition to the first. Also, the scoring is very, very similar to Vaughan Williams's Fifth, particularly in the woodwinds. 2 flutes with the second doubling piccolo, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, and 2 oboists, but the second oboe only plays English horn, so that it automatically gives the entire woodwind section a slightly darker hue throughout. Vaughan Williams's Fifth calls for 2 horns, she asks for 4. Otherwise, the brass scoring is identical. Timpani in both pieces. Vaughan Williams doesn't use any percussion other than timpani. Ruth Gipps calls for a very little bit throughout the symphony, and then the string section. If the second symphony was based on 3 ascending notes, the first symphony is based on 3 descending notes that you hear right away in the opening flute solo. Those 3 notes permeate all 4 movements of this work. You could look at them as 4 descending notes with a third one missing. She takes that 4-note idea and does all sorts of things with it all throughout the work. When the cellos come in a little later under the solo winds, they simply take those notes and reorder them accompanimentally, and then a little later on still, when the oboe sets up an accompanying figure, so are the 3 main notes there. Okay. So you're already seeing the tremendous amount of variety she gets out of those 3 notes. When the first violins have a little bit of theme later, there it is, stood on its head. This is symphonic thinking of the highest order. The second movement begins with this lovely, lovely oboe solo. So you're thinking, what does this have to do with this? Well, let's talk about octave displacement. So I'm going to jump to a totally different piece here that you all know. West Side Story, when Tony is singing about what it is he may find at the gym, you know, maybe this thing that he's been searching for all his life is going to be at the dance at the gym, and he sings, and I'm not a singer, please forgive me. Could be, who knows? So he's singing, could be, who knows? It's only just out of reach. So if you take those 3 notes, take the C and just put it down an octave, you get. So Bernstein's already telling you that what Tony's looking for at the dance is going to be Maria. So if we take this opening oboe theme in the second movement of Gipps's First, take that A, put it up an octave, and we get another variation of same 4 notes. The oboe solo in the third movement. Same 4 notes. And yes, in case you were wondering, they do come back in the finale several times when the cellos start their little ostinato. So she uses 2 of them. And then the violas come in over that. So from the word go, even if this work is a spilling over of all of these things that she could not resist saying, she is still establishing herself as a very, very structured, organized symphonic thinker. So how do you follow up a grand four-movement First Symphony and an absolutely awe-inspiring piece for organ and orchestra? You end it with music by perhaps the grandest composer of all. Many years ago when the Philharmonic did a suite from Handel's Royal Fireworks music, we called the concert "To Him I Bend the Knee." That's what Beethoven said about Handel. Beethoven worshipped Handel. And so we thought, why not bring Mr. Handel back in the form of his water music? This is not going to be the original scoring. This is going to be a version for full symphony orchestra by the English composer-conductor Hamilton Harty. And so after these grand works by Gipps and Demessieux, we're going to conclude the concert with Please come join us for this afternoon of grandeur, of exploration, ending with one of the great glories of the basic core repertoire.